Hey everyone, Jeff here to talk about my newest product out on the DMsGuild, which is another version of the Ranger because we don't have enough of those out there in the world. So I think a lot of people are of the opinion that the original Ranger that you have in the player's handbook has a lot of problems. So much so that even Wizards had released an Unearthed Arcana version of the Ranger, like a revised Ranger, that was supposed to kind of fix some of the issues that a lot of the community had with the original class, mostly related to the Beastmaster. I think the base class is liked well enough, but then you have certain features like Favorite Enemy or Natural Explorer that, depending on the campaign you're in, and depending on what kind of locations you're in or what you're fighting, you can either feel very useful or completely useless. Certainly if you can imagine that you were a ranger with your favorite terrain being coast and desert, which is a weird combination in of itself, but coast and desert, and maybe your favorite enemies are dragons and giants, and then you go into a Curse of Strahd game. You're not going to be very useful. You're not going to have a lot of fun. You're not going to feel like you're doing anything to contribute, and that a good number of your features might as well not even exist because you're not getting any use out of them. And, I acknowledge, and I think this is worth mentioning, that is partially responsibility for the player in that sort of example. Don't build a character that's not appropriate for the game you're going to be playing in. That's not even just for Rangers, that's just a general rule that people should try to follow. Build the character that makes sense for the campaign you're going to play in. But Rangers, more so than any of the other classes, it's very easy to make a choice that then ends up putting you in a position where you're not doing as much as you'd like to be able to do in that campaign through no fault of your own. I know I had a player in one of my games. She plays a Ranger. She still plays. But I think she was frustrated for a certain leg of time because they weren't encountering any of her favorite enemies, which I'm remembering correctly were monstrosities and dragons at the time. And they hadn't done a lot in the forest for a while. They were out in some plain areas, and then they were fighting through a city or a citadel. And certainly that wasn't purposeful on my part. I wasn't trying to prevent her from using her features or anything like that. But just the fact that the story moved in that sort of direction where she wasn't able to get a lot of use out of the things that her class is supposed to be good at was understandably, I think, frustrating for her. And so that partially leads into the goals that I had for this new... I hesitate to call it a new version because it's almost 70% or 80% the player's handbook Ranger. It's not that different. There are just a couple of features that I altered or changed, or I took aspects from the revised Ranger and aspects of the player's handbook Ranger and just kind of mushed them together to try to make something new and better. But I essentially had 4 goals when it came to this product, because I like there to be a reason for why I'm making something for people like you to look at. So number 1, there was to fix as many of the mechanical and flavor issues with the class as possible. Number 2, make the Beastmaster in particular feel less clunky and feel like a Beastmaster Ranger can actually contribute properly and not feel like they're weaker than the rest of the party. Number 3, to have the subclasses fall in line with the new subclasses that got released in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which had a slightly different design choice compared to the Hunter and the Beastmaster in the Player's Handbook. And number 4, which is the most important thing to me, it needed to keep the skeleton of the Player's Handbook Ranger. I wanted it to be as close as possible to the Player's Handbook Ranger while still being an improvement. And that's partially because of I don't remember if it was Mike Merles or if it was Jeremy Crawford. One of them had said that the Player's Handbook Ranger is the default Ranger. They were no longer making any plans to put out a new Ranger. And with that design philosophy in mind, and with the fact that we got the new Xanathar's subclasses, which built off of the Player's Handbook Ranger, I wanted to release not a new class per se, but just some slightly altered features to improve the ones that don't work out very well. With the ultimate goal being that you can play my base ranger and then go grab Gloomstalker or Horizon Walker or whatever from Xanathar's and have them work. Have there be nothing you have to do to make them work. So the best way I found to do that was to take 3 of the features from the base ranger, modify them, alter them, present new versions of them, change up the Beastmaster quite a bit, because that's the thing that needed the most work and the most help, and then add subclass-specific spells to the Hunter and the Beastmaster, like the subclasses you get in Xanathar's. So the first of these altered features is Favored Enemy. And honestly, while I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with this, I stumbled upon, call it an epiphany. There's really no way to fix Favored Enemy in a way that prevents those issues I mentioned earlier with Ranger players feeling like sometimes they're useful and sometimes they're not, without completely revamping the way Favored Enemy works. Because the whole point of Favored Enemy is that you have a specific type of enemy that you as a Ranger, like, you hate these enemies, or you have a lot of experience fighting them, or something that just makes it so that you know where to hit them, you know the ins and outs of how they function, what to do to make them hurt. And by the very nature of a feature that does that sort of thing, you're gonna have situations where sometimes it doesn't come up, and I don't think there's any real way to fix that beyond just saying you're good at fighting anything, which goes against the whole point of the feature in the first place. I like Favored Enemy, I like the flavor of it, I like the idea of it, and I wanted to try to keep it. To do that, I took the best parts of the Player's Handbook Ranger's Favored Enemy and the best parts of the Revised Ranger's Favored Enemy, mush them together. So you get to choose what type of Favored Enemy you want. Aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, giants, monstrosities, oozes, plants, or undead, or 2 humanoids, like gnolls and orcs, as given as the example. That stays as it is. And you don't have the issue with the Revised Ranger where you can't choose certain things until you get to a certain level. I like the increased freedom. It's entirely possible that you could have a level 1 ranger that really hates dragons and has studied about dragons and knows how to fight dragons, even though they're not at really the level where you'd expect them to be able to kill a dragon. I think that's fine. So that stays. Additionally, you get to keep the whole advantage on wisdom survival checks for tracking them, as well as intelligence checks to recall information about them. That makes sense. And you get to learn one language of your choice as long as that creature speaks it. I didn't like that the Revised Ranger lets you just take random languages for no reason. It just doesn't make sense to me logically that you'd be able to choose giants and then suddenly you can speak abyssal. So I removed that. It's got to be something that these creatures can actually speak, because it would make sense that you hate these things so much or you want to fight these things so badly that you would learn how they talk. You'd learn how to communicate with them so that you can learn about them better, or maybe get information from them or something like that. The other thing that you get is the Revised Ranger's extra damage, which is +2 to start and then increases to +4 when you hit 6th level. That is one thing that I really like that the Revised Ranger did that makes a lot of sense to me. This is your favored enemy. You should know how to fight them better than any other type of creature. And especially in a system like Dungeons & Dragons, that translates to you should be able to do more damage to them. I think, as I mentioned previously, you know where to hit them. You know where their weak spot is, or you know that they have a certain organ, a certain place that if you hit it, you'll do more damage. Or you know that they tend to move in this way before they make a lunge or something, so you can take advantage of that sort of thing. So you get that. I think that extra damage slightly helps the whole you're either good or you're not problem that Favored Enemy gives you, because at the very least when you are fighting your favored enemy, you are better in combat. You can do something more effectively against them rather than just being able to say, I know stuff about it. So Natural Explorer is the second feature that I altered a little bit. I think there's some confusion, at least I've seen a lot of discussion in this direction about, what makes a ranger, really? Is it someone who knows how to survive in the wilderness? Is it someone who, do you have to have an animal companion? Do you have to use a bow? Do you have to be Dexy? Can you be strength? And all sorts of different questions like that. I do think whatever everyone else's opinion is, for me, I think that Aragorn, Strider from Lord of the Rings, is the archetypal ranger. That's my opinion on the matter. Because above everything else, he knows how to survive. He knows what to do to, how to camp, how to find food, how to avoid danger, all those sorts of things. And I think a ranger should be able to do that. And Natural Explorer is sort of the D&D representation of that ability. The problem with the player's handbook version is 4 little words. In your favored terrain. Pretty much the entirety of how it works only functions when you're in your favored terrain. So if your favorite terrain is forest, you only get these benefits when you're in a forest. If your favorite terrain is Underdark, because maybe you've got a backstory that heavily deals with the Underdark, you only get the benefits from that feature when you're in the Underdark. How much would it suck then if you were, pulled into a high seas adventure, or you have to go into the desert for a while, or, you spend most of your time in the forest? That's not fun for a player who's now essentially getting punished because they chose features and abilities for their character based on their backstory instead of what is mechanically the best thing to do. And that should be rewarded. That shouldn't be punished. And don't get me wrong, it does make sense to me that a ranger who has spent all their life in the forest would not necessarily know how to survive along the coast or in the desert or in the mountains. I do get that. However, I still feel that rangers as a whole should be good at surviving in general. Even if they're not totally familiar with the landscape, they should still have the skills and the knowledge and the expertise necessary to be able to apply their knowledge in a way that allows them to survive and do certain things even out of their favorite terrain. And not to mention, a lot of the bullet points in that feature don't necessarily have anything to do with the terrain. It's just something that you think anyone with the skill to be able to do that thing should be able to do anywhere. My philosophy is that a ranger should be able to survive wherever they are. That's what they're good at. That's what they know how to do, is survive. Even if they don't know where they are, even if you're used to hanging around the plains and now you're smack dab in the middle of the ocean, you should still have the mindset and the capability to figure out what needs to be done and how to survive the best way possible. And then, if you are in your favorite terrain, that is like expertise. That is, you absolutely know what you're doing and what needs to be done, to the point where you don't have to think about it. That's how I think it should work. And so my version of Natural Explorer follows that philosophy. You still get your doubled proficiency bonus when you're making wisdom or intelligence checks related to your favorite terrain. So survival, nature, whatever it is that you have a proficiency in that skill. Double your proficiency bonus, because you're good at that thing already, you're proficient in it, but being in your favorite terrain just makes it even better. You're even better at it. And then when it comes to the bulleted points, you get those regardless of what terrain you're in, because you're a ranger and you know, just in a blanket way, how to survive and how to move stealthily and things like that. It's very similar to the revised ranger in that respect. And you can pick a less common terrain that isn't necessarily going to be found in your campaign without being punished for it. And that to me is the important thing. That you're not being punished for a choice you're making at character creation or a choice that's flavorful instead of mechanical, because that just shouldn't be how the game is. You shouldn't be punished for making a choice like that. So let's look at those bulleted points for a quick second. Difficult terrain doesn't slow your group's travel. You're a ranger. Even if you've never been in the jungle, or even if you've never been in the mountains, the sorts of places that you might find a difficult terrain over a long distance, you still know how to sort of navigate through tough spaces without being slowed down. And you can help your friends out too. You can look out into the distance and say, okay, I can see that we're going to have trouble if we try to scale up that cliff, but if we go down here to the right, it looks like there's a path down there, so we can just follow that path down and around and find a much easier way up. That's the sort of thing that bullet point is representing, your ability to look at the environment around you and figure out how to navigate it in the best way possible. If you're traveling alone, you can move stealthily at a normal pace. Normally, in order to move stealthily over a great distance, your group needs to travel at a slow pace to represent they're taking their time, they're making sure to stay in the shadows or waiting for passing creatures perhaps to pass by, or even just, moving slowly to be careful about how much noise they make. Rangers don't have to do that. I remember I used to play Airsoft Milsim for a very brief amount of time, and I remember being shown how you want to, pack your stuff in a way that when you move around, your ammo isn't rattling, or, you don't have something clanging against something else, and all those sorts of things. That's something that a ranger knows how to do. That's something that a ranger can, ensure that they're not going to make noise. They know how to stick to the shadows. They know how to avoid danger while still moving at a steady clip. That's what that bullet point represents. While tracking other creatures, you also learn their exact number, their sizes, and how long ago they passed through the area. Again, one of the things that makes a ranger, survival and the ability to track things. How many times did we see Aragorn, kind of ear to the ground, listening for vibrations and movement, finding tracks and footprints, and spotting little, barely noticeable indications that someone or something came through here. He can tell you there's a big group of them, maybe 10. They came through here about an hour ago. I think we literally see him do that at one point. A ranger should be able to do that. And again, regardless of what terrain they're in, you shouldn't have to be in the forest to be able to figure out, oh, there's 10 of these guys. I can see people making that argument, but again, for the sake of balance and making rangers a more interesting class to play, I don't agree with it. So you can do this wherever you are. Okay, now at this point, things might get a little confusing, because up till now, we've basically just been reading off of the bullet points that are right in the player's handbook, practically verbatim. But these last 3 bullet points are designed to work with a product that I have on the DMsGuild, which I'll have a link down in the description for, which is called The Explorer's Guide to the Wilderness. And it's basically a rule set for dungeon masters to help with determining overland travel, wilderness travel. Your party is venturing into the woods to get someplace. It's going to take them so many days. Here's a set of rules to figure out how to sort of run that. It contains rules for that long distance travel. It contains stat blots for terrain, for types of environments, because the rules kind of treat environments sort of like monsters. You might have seen that there was an Unearthed Arcana article that kind of played around with that idea. And I believe the Angry GM also had an idea that kind of fit in the same way, which is where a lot of my inspiration came from for this. And also how to determine things like random encounters. So you can go down, head to DMsGuild, grab it, take a look through it if you want to pause this video and see what it's about. If you don't want to make things as quick and simple as possible, one of the things that the rules kind of deal with is this idea of traveling actions, where when you, or I should say when your party is traveling, every character gets to choose an action they want to do for that day. Where you can have someone who's keeping a lookout. You can have someone who's foraging, looking for food while they travel. You have someone who is navigating, if you need to actually, because you generally need at least one person who knows where you're going and how to get there. And there's other actions besides some things that aren't really spelled out specifically. Just if your characters are like, oh, well, I want to read this book. Okay, well, if that's your traveling action, you have a cart that you can ride in. You're not going to be able to keep a look, and that sort of thing. Basically, whatever occupies your player's time. So these 3 bullet points kind of meld into that idea of traveling actions. So rangers get to use the keep a lookout traveling action even if they're engaged in some other activity, even if they're engaging in some other traveling action. So they can forage and also keep a lookout. They can navigate while also keeping a lookout. They can do all sorts of other things while also keeping a lookout. Because, again, they know what it's like to be in the wilderness. They know how to spot danger and how to stay alert for it. And other classes have to choose one or the other. They can't forage and keep a lookout. They don't have that level of expertise to be able to, scout ahead while also look for food. They just have to use their passive perception. Rangers get to roll their perception regardless of what they're doing. We'll skip the second to last one and go down to the last one for a second. You have a +5 bonus for foraging checks. And note the parentheses, that if you are in your area of favored terrain, you get that +5 bonus in addition to your proficiency bonus being doubled. So let's say you're a 5th level ranger and you're in the forest, which is your favored terrain. You have a proficiency bonus of +3 and you have proficiency in the survival skill. When you make a check to forage, you're getting +3 for your proficiency times 2 because you're in your favored terrain, so that's +6, +5 for this bullet point, which brings you to +11. And that's not even in addition to your wisdom modifier, which will probably be somewhere around a +2, a +3, if I had to guess. So now you're getting something in the range of +14 to make a foraging check. Now that seems very high, but it's high on purpose. You're a ranger. You're in your favorite terrain. You know how to find food here. And barring a very low roll, you will be able to find food. And that's sort of what that represents. And even if you're not in your favorite terrain, you still have that +5. You still know how to get food. You're not as good at it as if you were in the place that you've probably called home for however many years. All right, so let's go back to that bullet point I skipped. +5 bonus to navigation checks. You're very good at, finding your way around. Again, kind of like foraging. And just like foraging, if you're in your favorite terrain, you definitely know how to get around in your favorite terrain, so you also get that double proficiency bonus. And it's at this point, this is the reason I save this for last, that you might notice there's a bullet point from the player's handbook that is missing. Your group can't become lost except by magical means. I don't like that. I don't like that bullet point. I don't like that feature. If you're in a type of game where you don't care about overland travel, you don't care about, how difficult the journey is, you don't want to think about it, you're just one of those, all right, you start where you are, some days pass, you get to where you get to be, let's keep going. That's fine. Completely legitimate way to play, and if you want to insert that bullet point back into the class, you have my blessing to do so. For me, for the games I want to run, I like the idea of travel being an event in and of itself. It doesn't have to be something you spend a lot of time on, and the rules that I have in that Explorer's Guide are designed to not take a long period of time. It shouldn't take you a whole session to do it. I think that there should be value to that. And especially if you have a ranger in your party, I think the ranger being what they are, that is when you want overland travel to really matter. Maybe you don't want it to be a big focus if you have no rangers in your party, or you have no outlanders in your party. But if you have a ranger player, they want to be able to use their things. And one of the things that makes rangers cool, and why people want to be rangers, I think, is because they want to be good at this sort of stuff. So give them an opportunity. That bullet point doesn't give them that opportunity, because they can't get lost. They know where they're going at all times. They don't have to make any rolls. Nothing happens. They just get there. And you could introduce magic, sure, but I feel like most of the things that are magical that could cause them to become lost are complicated enough or powerful enough that there's not an easy way around it anyway. Like, you'd need the wizard to do something, so then the ranger isn't really getting to use their stuff anyway. Maybe that just makes sense to me, but I left that bullet point out for that reason. So if you're actually looking at this ranger document that I'm talking about right now, you'll notice that there's a green box to the right of the Natural Explorer feature. This is because I'm sure not everyone who picks up this ranger and decides, well, out of the 50 rangers I've seen, this is the one I want to play, will actually be using my wilderness travel rules. So this is just there for those people, so that they understand, if you're not using these rules, just replace those last 3 bullet points with these 3 bullet points. I do encourage you to use those rules that I have. I think they're cool. I think they work pretty well. I think it's a quick way to get through like a long journey and have it actually mean something. So just replace the last 3 bullet points in the Natural Explorer feature as it's written with the 3 bullet points that are in the green box, which are sort of more generalized versions of the same idea, and put a little less emphasis on wilderness travel as a whole. All right, let's talk about primeval awareness now, because it's either entirely useless or way too good for what it costs. The player's handbook version is the useless one. You have to spend a spell slot and then essentially get to know if there are any of a certain kind of creature within a mile of you. 6 miles if you are using if you're in your favorite terrain. You don't get to know their location. You don't get to know how many of them there are. You just know if there is a dragon within that range, or if there is an aberration within that range, or an elemental within that range, or whatever. And depending on how your DM wants to read it, arguably, they could, if you said to them, hey, are there any aberrations, celestials, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead within 6 miles of me? They could just say, yes. And that's it. Well, which ones? You don't get to know that information. It doesn't specify. It doesn't really specify. You can go one way or the other. You can either be specific, yes, you sense a dragon, or some dragons, yes, you sense some fiends, or they might just say, yeah, something from amongst that group is within 6 miles. And that, it's so useless. I think obviously so. There are certainly a couple of situations where it might be useful. Certainly, if you're allowed to be specific about it, knowing that there's undead within a mile. By the way, you might be hearing some jingling going on. Speaking of rangers and their beast companions. Oh, she's coming right over here. Hello. Hold on a second. This is Carrie. Say hi. She doesn't want to say hi. But, can I do this video while I'm holding her? Matt Koval, I have a lot of respect for you, but this is the fluffiest kitty. Look how fluffy she is. Yeah, oh? Yeah. Hi. Hello. Alright, we'll put her down. So where was I? So it could be more useful if your DM is cool with it being a little more specific. So, yes, there are fiends within a mile. Obviously, that's probably something very important to know. But even then, you don't know where they are. You don't know how many of them are there. It's almost generally not even going to be worth expending the spell slot to use it. Conversely, when you look at the revised Rangers version of Primeval Awareness, that's way too strong. Very strong. First of all, it's free. It doesn't cost a spell slot. You don't have a limited number of uses per rest or anything like that. You just have to meditate for a minute, and you know if any of your favorite enemies are within 5 miles. So it's more limited in the sense that it's only the favorite enemies that you have. So at best, you'll have 6 humanoids that you know what's around. At worst, it'll be, 3 of any other kind. But even so, even with that limitation to it, it's still so much stronger. You have, not only do you get to know how many of them there are, just flat out the number. Not a vague number, not a, oh, well, there's about, a dozen. No. It says I know the number. How many are there? You also get to know their location, which, again, you can interpret in different ways, but to me, that pretty much is like, yeah, you know that they are right there. That can be very frustrating as a DM. She just looked at me like, oh, Was I making too much noise?
Let me make some more.
Sorry.
I noticed she's like scratching and then my phone went off.
Just looked at it again. So if you keep hearing jingling, that's just her. Just ignore it. So anyway, my primeval awareness tries to combine the best of both of these ideas. You have to expend a spell slot, but for so doing, you get to know which of your favorite enemies are around within a 5-mile radius. You get to know how many of them there are to a rough estimate. So you're not going to know there's exactly 30 of them, but your dungeon master might say there's a couple dozen, or there's definitely just one, or there's more than one, maybe 2 or 3, that sort of thing. You get to know their direction from you, so north or towards that keep or something to that effect. You also get to know their size, because for me personally, I think, depending on how you want to kind of visualize how this magic would work, I think that an ancient dragon should show up differently than if there's a dragon whelp in the area. I think you should be able to tell the difference between those two things. And so I would do that for my ranger friend. I would tell her there's a big dragon nearby. And you also know their rough distance from you. So within a mile, if you're in a keep and you're trying to see, how many orcs are in here, they all seem to be within the keep, for example. Could be one response. Right at the edge of your awareness. So, right near the edge of that 5-mile marker. Or even like right in front of you. Or at the very least, within the immediate vicinity. This doesn't allow you to say if undead is are your favorite enemy, and you're talking to someone and you're like, are they a vampire? And you pop your primeval awareness, you'll know, yeah, there's a vampire like somewhere in the immediate vicinity, which could be the dude you're talking to. It could be someone hiding behind that rock right over there. But it won't give you a zero in yeah, there's an undead and he's that guy right there. You won't get that specific. I could see a typical use of this feature being a response let's say you have beasts, orcs, and dragons as included in some of your favorite enemies. You could get something like, you can sense a lot of beasts all around you, all within your awareness, although you do note that roughly 3 miles to the northwest, the density seems much lower than everywhere else. Roughly in that same region, you can sense what seems to be a large group of orcs, maybe 3 or 4 dozen. At least enough that it could be that warband that you guys are tracking right now. And where you are also located right now, you can also sense a very big dragon towards the large mountain to the east. That might be one way that I would... Yeah, that's an example of how a DM might use this version of Primeval Awareness. You get a good amount of information that's actually valuable without, I think, revealing too much. So the last of the changes that I made were to the Beastmaster, and the inclusion of subclass spells for the Hunter and the Beastmaster both. Now, I think a big issue, or really the big issue with the way the Beastmaster worked, was the fact that you had to use one of your attacks in order to allow your beast to attack. Which is just, it's very clunky. That's not particularly fun design. And it also, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you really get down to it, If you have a wolf, it just seems weird that if you want the wolf to attack someone, you just have to stand there. You're not allowed to swing your sword at someone and tell the wolf, get him. And it's especially weird when you consider that no other class has this problem when it comes to pets. You want to play a necromancer wizard, and you cast Animate Dead, and you can get more than one skeleton as a wizard. You can have a bunch of skeletons or a bunch of zombies. You just have to use a bonus action and tell the zombies or the skeletons, do this, and they'll just do it until they can't do it anymore, until they complete it, until they're made to stop, or you tell them to do something else. just use that bonus action and you're good. Why should the Beastmaster not be the same? And so my version borrows heavily from the revised Ranger, but instead of giving the Beast its own initiative, which I think is its own version of clunky, it now acts on your turn. So I know this probably looks like a really big, complicated thing. The gist of it is this. You get a medium or smaller beast of challenge rating 1/2 or lower. I made sure to include that. Your DM may allow you to pick something else if they approve it. So if you want to have a big brown bear like Trinket, your DM might allow that. It's right there in the rules to establish that that's their choice if they want to do that. If the beast had a multi-attack option, like say the black bear, it loses it. So your bear can either bite or claw to attack. It can't do both. The beast's proficiency bonus is now the same as your proficiency bonus, which means things probably won't change right away, at level 3. But when your proficiency bonus starts to go up, its bonus will start to go up too, which makes it better at hitting and makes its skills better. Speaking of that proficiency bonus, it gets to add the proficiency bonus to its damage and to its AC. So makes it a little tankier, a little hardier. Won't necessarily go down to every goblin stabbing with a +3. While also allowing it to do a little more damage over time. So there's at least some sense of scaling there. It gains proficiency in 2 skills of your choice. I personally wouldn't recommend putting these into history or medicine or arcana or something, but certainly athletics, acrobatics, intimidation, survival could maybe justify nature, especially if your ranger has speak with animals. You could actually potentially, talk to your wolf and be like, do you know about things? And the wolf is like, yeah, I know about things. I'm a wolf. And that again comes right from the revised ranger. It gets proficiency in all saving throws, again, to help it survive a little bit more. And it gets additional hit dice whenever you level up as a ranger. So if you multi-class and you become a ranger cleric or a ranger druid or something, it's only going to get the additional hit dice when you get another ranger level. And finally, and I think this is a very common house rule anyway, but I put it right there in the rules to make it sort of the standard. It gets its own death saving throw meter. So if it does go down to 0, it doesn't die outright like most monsters would. You get to roll for death saves, giving you a better chance to keep it up and save its life. So your companion gets ability score increases just like you do. Either +1 to 2 ability scores or +2 to 1. This is not in the rules, but at your DM's discretion, they might let you choose feats if they are appropriate and make sense for it to have. So, Magic Initiate, I would say probably not. An armor feat that gives it access to light armor, maybe. I might allow them to have barding regardless. Although I should mention, if you are going to let your players give armor to an animal companion, I would probably have that not stack with the AC, with the proficiency bonus to their AC. Just because armor is armor. That proficiency bonus to AC is kind of like another way to calculate AC, and the two don't stack. So there's in case anyone asks, there's the answer to that question. So I mentioned before, your animal companion acts on your turn instead of having its own turn. Again, I think it's another common house rule. People will do that a lot for wizards and their familiars, for example. It's just much easier to run. It's not as clunky. Gives the ranger a little bit more freedom to kind of be like, I would let them mix and match however they want to do. You don't have to do all your stuff and then your pet has to do all of its stuff. You can kind of, mix and match a little bit. I would allow that personally, but I like that level of freedom. So again, speaking about making it easier to run the companion, In order to command your companion to do something, all you have to do is use a bonus action, and then verbally command it. The idea being that you are actually shouting out a command for it to follow. And once it receives that command, it does that command until it either can't do it anymore for whatever reason, completes it, or you issue a new command to it. This makes it more like a Wizard's Undead, which again, if they can do it, why can't the Ranger? And I think just makes it overall easier. You don't have to worry about using an action every single turn to get use out of this beast companion that is like the hallmark of your subclass. I think that's ridiculous. And, you know, I say it has to be verbal. You have to be able to communicate with your beast companion in some way. You know, it needs to be able to hear you. You could get around the verbal limitation if you have like a headband of telepathy or something like that. You know, something that lets you speak telepathically, that would be fine. But the idea being that you are issuing the command for them to follow. And if something happens to you where you can't issue a command, you go down or you get separated or something, then your beast companion will act like the relatively intelligent animal that it is. It will defend itself. It will defend you. I would, of course, have it defend other party members because, you know, more than likely, if you've been traveling with the same party for a while, that beast companion probably has a connection to them too. And that just makes sense to me. Death. Because, you know, one of the big issues with the Beastmaster is how weak and easy to kill the companion is. I think a lot of these changes already make it much more likely that it'll survive from fight to fight. But, you know, the unthinkable can still happen. And your companion could go down permanently. And at that point, again, borrowed from the revised Ranger, you can bring it back with some gold and some time. You need to have a part of the animal, you know, hopefully it's the whole thing still in one piece, but even if it's not, you can bring it back. And I did go back and forth on that a few times, because a part of me was thinking, well, losing your animal companion could be a really emotional moment and a great story moment, you know, drive you for vengeance against like the being that killed it or something like that. Being able to just bring it back with 25 gold pieces lessens that and makes it less likely to happen, I guess. But ultimately I decided this is the hallmark of your class. And if you want to keep the same companion throughout your adventuring career, I think you should be allowed to have a chance to do that. Your dungeon master might disagree, maybe remove that paragraph so that you can't just do that. You need to use more conventional forms of revival magic, like Revivify or something like that. Oh, true. Reincarnation could be cool. You could turn, if you use your own custom table and it was a wolf, but now it's like a tiger. That's cool. Anyway, but, you know, if whatever happens, if you can't get it back for some reason, maybe the big evil lich disintegrates it, you can also get a new one with some time and effort. And you know, then seek vengeance for the loss of your pet. So I know that's a lot. Like, this is just one feature right here. It's a lot to go through, but I think kind of like character creation, once you've gone down the list of stuff and, you know, marked things out, that'll, you know, you'll have everything on paper and it'll be fine to run at that point. Just, you know, make notes of some of the more complicated things. And of course, always refer back if you know, oh, okay, it died. What does that mean again? So other features for this subclass, again, are designed to improve the way the subclass works mechanically. Exceptional training from the player's handbook, gone. This new version of the Ranger already can use the bonus action to command the pet to do things. That's how you command the pet. And that includes things you can command the pet, dash over there. You can command the pet, you know, dodge it, you know, try not to get hit by it, come to me and don't get hit while you're doing it, which is, you know, could be your flavorful way of saying, I'm going to have my cat disengage or whatever. So instead, at that level, you get Primal Strike, which is basically the Moon Druid's Primal Strike. Your Beast Companion now does, it's not technically magic damage, it's just its attacks overcome resistances as if they were magical. Very sorely needed buff. Something that even Wizards, I believe, in the newest errata, that's in the new errata, that your Beast Companion, I think at level 7, gets that sort of feature in addition to whatever else you would have at that level. Bestial Fury, identical to what it's like in the player's handbook. Slightly different wording, but it does exactly the same thing. Either your companion gets its multi-attack back, or if it never had multi-attack, it can attack twice. Simple, increased damage output, allows it to be as good as, an actual, brown bear would be. And then finally, Share Spells is also identical to the version of the player's handbook, except for an added clause, where now, if you Hunter's Mark something, your pet also gets the benefit of that Hunter's Mark. So if you Hunter's Mark the giant, Hunter's Mark gives you an extra D8, I believe. I don't remember if it's a scaling spell or not. I don't remember if I don't think it's a D8 per spell level. I think it's just a D8. But you get that extra D8, but now your pet also gets that extra D8 when attacking that creature. Kind of fits into the idea of, again, sharing spells. You're getting this Hunter's Mark benefit, so your pet also does as well. I'm still floating around the idea of somehow giving all rangers access to Hunter's Mark, because it's such an important part of the class. I know a lot of people disagree and say, you don't have to Hunter's Mark. No, you don't. It's not a requirement. But it's so tied to rangers. It just seems a waste to make it optional in some way. It'd be nice if it was somehow just baked into the class. But since it's not, I decided not to play around with that. All right. Final thing to talk about is subclass spells, because if you have Xanathar's Guide to Everything, you know that the subclasses that got released in that supplement get additional spells at level 3 when you choose your subclass, and it's level 3, and then as you level up, you get more spells. That's awesome. It makes them very similar to Paladins, which is the only other official half-caster in the game, and so. If Paladins get all these extra spells, Rangers should get some extra spells too. So I love that design choice. It would just be nice if they had also given Hunters and Beastmasters some sort of, maybe in the same book, a section that says, if you play a Hunter or a Beastmaster, you also get this feature, and it's extra spells for them. But they didn't do that, so I did it. Hunters get Compelled Duel, Magic Weapon, Haste, Death Ward, and Hold Monster. All of these are spells that can help you with hunting down and killing things. Compelled Duel forces your quarry to attack you instead of running away. Magic Weapon obviously lets you hurt things that can only be hurt by magic. So if you find yourself at a lower level, only not having a magic weapon yet, or maybe if you lose your magic weapon and you pick up a mundane weapon, you can still do what you need to do to that ghost or whatever it is you're trying to hunt. Haste obviously lets you move quicker. Run down whatever it is you're chasing, and not to mention AC bonus, obviously useful for fighting anything, and the extra attack, obviously useful for dealing more damage to what you're trying to hunt. Death Ward is just some much needed security when you're fighting something that is large that can kill you really bad, or if you're fighting hordes of things, lots of attacks coming at you, might want to have some protection so you don't go down as easily. And then finally, Hold Monster, pretty self-explanatory. Lets you paralyze the foe, make it easier to kill. I think they're all pretty flavorful for the hunter, work pretty well, and help expand its list of options and make it so you don't have to waste those precious options for what spells you're choosing to take on things that should work really well with the subclass. So Beastmasters, you get Command, Enhance Ability, Catnap, Dominate Beast, and Skill Empowerment. All of these spells are intended to be thematic and flavorful spells for a person that, commands a beast. and is able to control an animal. Hopefully it's relatively obvious, command, dominate beast. But then you get, enhanceability and skill empowerment. Those are there to kind of, since a good amount of your damage is focused on another creature, making that creature better at doing things. Catnap is a little bit of an odd man out. It's something I sort of floated around for a little bit before eventually settling on, because unfortunately, Rangers don't really have a lot of abilities that regenerate on a short rest. I actually don't know if they have any. But it's still useful for regenerating HP, especially if you're in a hostile environment where you don't have time to hunker down for a full hour, but you really need to spend some hit dice. On top of that, Dungeons & Dragons, a majority of games are team-based. You have a whole party with you. And if that party has a warlock, or a fighter, or a druid, or any other class that can really benefit from being able to take a short rest really quickly, they're gonna love you. And plus, I just think the idea of your Beastmaster, it's called Catnap. It just sounds like something I feel like a Beastmaster should be able to do. And that's it. That's my long-winded explanation for why I even bothered to make this Ranger revision when there's so many Ranger revisions out there and everyone's tried to put their hands into it. I really tried very hard to try to keep it as close to the Player's Handbook Ranger as possible. I wanted to ensure that if you did want to play this version of the class, it was just fixing the things about the base class that needed to be fixed, and did not prevent you from taking, say, the Xanathar's subclasses, or someone else's homebrewed subclass, and fitting it in. So, no big major, alterations to feature progression or anything like that. Just, here's the stuff that I felt was problematic in the original class. Here's a better version of that same exact thing. So I hope you all enjoyed kind of hearing my thoughts about why I did certain things. If you want to pick up the class, just head down to the description below. There's a link to the product on the Dungeon Masters Guild, where you can get it completely for free. You don't have to pay a cent. If you'd like to help me out, really appreciate that, but it is certainly not required. And if you do end up doing that, I might be able to maybe put some art in it, or some of my other products, because there is no art in there. It's just rules, which, functions fine. There's no mechanical benefit to having art in your DMsGuild product, but it does make it look nicer, maybe a little more attractive. If you able to help me with that, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Down there in the description, you can also find links to my website, thearcaneathenaeum.org, my Twitter, my Instagram, and also my Patreon if you'd like to contribute and back me there. So until the next video, keep having fun playing Dungeons & Dragons. I'll see you around.